Let's talk about love and money. Because while one makes the world go round, the other can cause it to spin wildly off its axis, especially when one partner earns significantly more than the other. Today's episode of Life Chapters Money Choices is all about what happens when paychecks in a relationship are unequal and those unspoken expectations, guilt, resentment, or even shame start to sneak in through the back door. We're joined by two exceptional guests, Chartered Wealth's Stephanie Ferreira, who is a financial planner with Chartered Wealth and who recently wrote an exceptional blog on the topic. Stephanie, great to have you with us today. Hope you're well.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
And of course, Kim Potgieter, as always, who reminds us that money is never just about the money. Kim, so great to have you back with us. So whether you're the breadwinner, you're the homemaker, or kind of somewhere in between, grab a coffee, grab a glass of wine, whatever else, or your partner, and join us as we unpack the financial and the emotional balancing act of modern love. Stephanie, maybe you could just kick it off, because and you've written so powerfully about the subtle emotional toll that income differences can have in relationships. There's guilt, there's resentment, there's even shame sometimes. Why does earning differently feel so fraught, even in the most loving of relationships?
Sure. I think naturally as humans we tend to attach our value to what we earn and what we've managed to achieve in our career. So it becomes what people's identity is. And often what we see in different relationships is that value isn't necessarily attached to what they're earning. So one might be earning a really big salary, but the other might have kind of taken a step back in their career for whatever reason, and maybe they're contributing to the household in a very different way. But I think the reality is people will always tend to attach their worth to what they earn.
And, there's a lot of ego to unpack in all of this. Kim, I know with your psychology background, you must look at this and think, these conversations around money can be absolute relationship killers, but they shouldn't be. They can actually enable relationships to thrive and to flourish. Why is it that we feel so vulnerable in confronting this topic of money in loving, committed relationships? Because it's certainly, when I look at my own very small sample of friends and certainly my parents, they never used to discuss money, apart from maybe arguing about it when I was very young. That was an overriding kind of childhood memory for me.
So I've got the same memory as you, and as we discussed before, that's why I came into this industry, very much just to help people feel more comfortable with these conversations. But you talk about feeling vulnerable. I think it's even more than that, because I know we do when we're talking about this topic, but what we also do is we trigger each other. And I think so many times we don't realize how much our partners trigger us. And for many times, I know in my own relationship, I've had to ask myself if it was actually my husband triggering me or whether it was something from my childhood that was triggering me. And I think for many couples, they don't even think about that. They just take it that it's the situation that they're in. And they forget about just stuff that they've got subconsciously. And I've seen it, I've enacted it in my own relationship, and I've watched many couples do it as well. And I think it's just thinking back to some of those triggers that have come with your childhood.
And you've touched on this concept, Stephanie, of unconscious scripts that we have in our lives, where some of those inherited money beliefs that Kim was talking to really come through in things like I must always provide, or I should earn more than my partner. How do these shape the way that we navigate our income differences in relationships?
Sure. I think even just to add to that, I think there's people out there who have, like both of you just said it, who have witnessed maybe a lot of fighting around money, and money always being like a constant stress in their lives. And I think maybe some people could choose to then rather say, oh, I've got to work hard, I've got to earn the most so that I'm not the person who's causing that money problem. So it really all goes back to what Kim always says, it's ultimately your relationship with money that causes these preconceived ideas in our minds.
Kim, when we look at this, what are some of the, when one partner earns more? I mean, have you seen this kind of unspoken resentment creep in? Almost like there's a running scoreboard. There's this competitive nature to the relationship. What are some of the negative consequences of this money stress inside a committed relationship?
So often I don't see it as much as competitive, but I see it coming out with people where they actually become resentful if the one isn't doing as well as they should be doing. And then the common one that I hear so often is, I earn all the money and my partner spends it all. So we start getting into these different kind of dynamics between us. So I don't see it as being as competitive. And then I think it also happens around our roles as male and female, that for many of the older traditional relationships that we work with the clients, the husband earned more than the wife. But in the last few years, I've seen that shift so much, where now wives are often earning more than their husbands. And that is a different dynamic to unpack as well, because your value is totally then challenged.
And also in terms of gender roles, Stephanie, there is this still in society today, as much as we may think, we're more enlightened and there's equality. There are these preconceived gender roles that we have, that the man should be earning the bulk of the income in the household and therefore providing. And so when you have that income flipped on its head, and now a woman earning more than a man in the relationship, how does that inform then the conversation that you should be having around values and who pays for what, so that there isn't this resentment that creeps in and erodes that relationship over time?
Sure. One thing I will say, obviously I'm a bit younger, so my generation, I think it's a lot more accepted when you see a female being the sort of, let's call it the main breadwinner or the higher income earner. What I think becomes incredibly difficult for women in that stage is that they then see themselves, they've now identified themselves as the main earner for the family, and then it's a constant juggle between career and potentially raising children and all the guilt that goes with making sure you're spending enough time with the right people. So, yeah.
So given that, I mean, what are some of the tools, Kim, that a woman, now let's focus in on, female higher income earners in relationships, what are some of the tools that you can offer them to help guide them through a journey that is very difficult? Because, at the same time, you've got all of these different competing components in your life. You've got family, you've got your career, and there's always this sense of guilt that has come through in our previous conversations that I should be maybe devoting more time to my family or giving more time to the other aspects of me. So what are some of the tools to help guide female income earners through this process?
Well, the place that I always like to start is just to have clarity on what for you success looks like. And I think that's a big one, because otherwise, if we don't know what it is we're trying to do, we will, when you earn more, then you just get tempted to want to earn more and more and more. But actually, I mean, many people that I speak to then have regrets later on that was what was pushing them and driving them. So I think just to stop and to define for yourself as a woman, or as a person, what is true wealth? What is it I'm trying to achieve? So that you're not tempted just to take more and more increases and more commitment to work and go, well, if I do want to be that mother, there is this word and.
Yeah.
And I think we so often forget the word and. I mean, I have 3 grown-up children. I've had a good career. And I don't believe that I wasn't a good mother just because I did that. So I think just starting and assessing for yourself what it is you want. Stop worrying about what other people are doing and the way they're doing it and how they're doing it, because that drives you mad.
But Stephanie, do you advise doing that in conjunction with your partner? So when we're talking about values, when we're talking about what is true wealth, if you're in a committed relationship, and ideally we really should be having these conversations before we get married, you at least have that foundational groundwork laid so you both understand where you're heading to.
Absolutely. So I always say, when you kind of talking about money conversations and working out what it ultimately is that you're trying to achieve, what does true wealth represent to you as a couple, the starting point is also starting with what are your goals, because that's often going to drive a lot of the conversations that you have together and how you choose to structure your life, structure your finances. If you can establish and have the same goals, obviously you're going to have some goals that are separate and you're going to have some goals that are together. But if you have those goals and they're clear and you both agree with them, it's a lot easier to build your finances and your time around those goals.
When we talk about defining those goals, I mean, what's a great way to unpack that? Because, I mean, goals can sometimes be intangible. My goal is to be happy one day. What does happy mean? What gives you happiness? What are some of the tools to help create a meaningful goal set and structure for a relationship, Kim? And do you often sit down when you're giving financial advice to your clients and say, right, are we going to bring the other partner in, or do you tend to just focus on whoever's approached you?
So when anybody contacts us, we ask them to bring their partners. Maybe just because of also my history, it doesn't work when one partner's doing it on their own without their partner. There's other stresses that come in. So at all possible that you're doing it together. And again, you have to be led through the process. The biggest horror I've seen on people's faces is when I sit there and I go, so tell me, I'm going to do it to you now, Michael. Tell me, Michael, what does your next chapter look like if it turns out well?
Yeah.
You haven't got a cooking clue what
Yeah.
it should look like.
Yeah.
So you need to be led through the process. And I think many of us have not given ourselves permission even to think about it. So back to what you said right in the beginning of our conversation today, is I only wish people were doing this before they got married, not once they were married. So it's starting those conversations, making sure that they're always together, and finding as much as possible a way that you're doing it in a neutral environment. This is not a judgment thing. This is us working together in order so that we can have that more healthy relationship together with money.
And what are you seeing, Stephanie, when you sit down? Because we want to get practical here, and there's obviously no one size fits all here. And we often are dealing with those intangibles. What does your next chapter look like? But what are some of the real strategies that you use to help couples who are wanting to manage those income gaps in a relationship in a way that obviously feels fair to both partners?
Sure. I think the hardest part is that fair is very subjective. So,
Right.
yeah. So from each person in the couple might have a very different view of what subjective means. But I would say the starting point is really just to unpack what are those expenses as a starting point so that you can identify where you might split them. But I mean, I've seen different scenarios. Some people split it proportionately, their expenses. So if you earn 50% more than your spouse, your partner, you cover 50% more of the expenses. What's left is left, then is each to their own. You can spend what you want. Some split it 50-50 down the middle, and some don't split it at all. Some just what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, and we kind of work it out together. So there's so many, as I said, there's no right or wrong answer, and I think it also very much depends on when in your life you found each other, because for my husband and I, we were children when we found each other. So we've really grown up together, and that's probably made money conversations a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if you find your person a little bit later in life, where you've already established your financial worlds separately, I think it's a lot harder to then have those conversations.
But just as important, obviously, even though it is hard, and I just think of my own situation where then you bring in paying for ex-wives, paying maintenance, what is fair, especially when, you obviously want to look after your children and you want to be committed to the current relationship, maybe bringing in separate properties, now putting those in together. And how do you value some of those intangibles, Kim, like looking after the children, doing all of that while also managing a career?
So I see, you're saying this, but I see with that conversation that you're having, and what's going on in your life, I see often a lot of resentment building up. And I think this is where it's so important. I know when we meet each other, it's all just, that connection that we've got. But it's important to have these kind of conversations, because when that resentment builds up later, it's just unfortunate for everybody involved. So rather stop, have these kind of conversations, even though they're uncomfortable. And that's the big thing you said about vulnerability. But yes, you have to be vulnerable to have these conversations. And then in a way, not take everything so personally.
Yeah.
I know for myself, some of my worst times with my husband have been when we've been talking about money. And generally it's because I've been taking things so personally. And in the meantime, I've forgotten that he's had a whole past life and he's picked up a whole lot of baggage, and it's not about me. And I think, when we are bringing in children from other marriages, it's very much a consideration that you should you should respect that about each other, that you're wanting to look after your own families.
Yeah. Do you ever see a kind of silent scorecard? And I know this is not a competitive thing, but a silent scorecard being kept. And, you're saying, right, I'm keeping track of who pays more and who contributes more, and that building quiet resentment.
I see that a lot of the time. So that's why, again, rather have it out there in black and white. Don't let it be that story in your head. Don't let it be you making it all up and then it just compounds and compounds and it's bigger. I mean, big discussions in families have always been often when somebody passes away and there's a new partner that comes in, and then you see the actual stress culminate because now the families are all involved as well, watching what's happening. Just talk about it. Get these conversations out there in the open instead of keeping all of these secrets.
Yeah, I think bottom line for me so far has definitely been open and honest and transparent communication. It may not always sound fair from the get-go, and whatever fair is, but as long as you're putting everything on the table and then you can work through that. I'm sure it's an uncomfortable thing to do initially, Stephanie, but at least you've got a base to work from there.
Yeah. 9 times out of 10, when people are fighting about money, it's because of a conversation they didn't have.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're always going to agree with each other in the conversation that you choose to have, but it's the one in your head that causes the most problems.
Well, there's one in my head currently that I know I need to have. But, when we talk about it, it sounds so obvious in hindsight and retrospect. But life's busy, something may happen, you move quickly on to the next task, and Kim, before you know it, what should have been a conversation has now been buried. And then resurfacing that conversation becomes quite a challenge. So how do you advise couples go about this? Is there a right or wrong way? Is there a better way? Or is it really all just dependent on the kind of relationship that you have with your partner?
I think, again, the worst times we do it are when we're emotionally charged. So when something's happened and then you go in, and when you go in strong, that other person doesn't hear you at all. So they just absolutely shut down and close. So a big thing I always say is have regular meetings with your financial planner, because if you both know that you're going in like once or twice a year to discuss all of this, you prepare for it, you think about it, and you're in the right place. Whereas if the one partner thinks that they're doing the other person a favor and they take care of it all, there's never those opportunities to have those discussions in an objective environment without all of those emotional triggers.
Yeah, that window of tolerance needs to be wide open. And often when we're running hot, or even if we're apathetic, you're not really within that window of tolerance to have those rational conversations. So I always like to step back when I'm running red and I can see the rev meter going off the side. But then my challenge is a personal thing, is then I struggle to go back in and find the right time to broach the subject. So then it simmers and boils. And then sadly, I've got a short fuse that I'm working on. It'll pop at some other stage. So you've also just, I guess, got to really understand who you are and those fundamentals. Stephanie, and I want to pick up on something that we touched. Maybe, Kim, you can kick us off, because you actually said in another episode that money is never just about money. It's this emotional safety, and maybe you could just unpack this link between emotional safety and financial safety, and how do we draw the line between support and subtle control in financial relationships, because that was certainly something that framed your experience with your father exerting that kind of control.
So again, it's the discussion that you have around, like, what does money represent to you? And if you can bring in some of those conversations with each other and find out what it represents to you. So my whole childhood, I watched money control. I watched my father control us with money. So if I ever feel in any situation somebody trying to control me, it's right back to that feeling of me being controlled, and I don't like being controlled. And then I exert, like what you just said, you see red, and then you shoot a short fuse, and then all of that happens. So in order to create this safe space, I think if you've shared that with your partner, you've actually had that conversation they know as much as you know that you're in your uncomfortable place. Instead of it being an uncomfortable conversation about them, it actually, and a big thing that I learned from some marriage counseling I've been doing, not anything to do with money, is to hold each other's hands and look in each other's eyes. And then all of a sudden you're in a better environment to have that discussion, as when your hands are flinging everywhere and you're not actually looking at each other, having the conversation. So that creates, I know it sounds weird, but you can't believe how it just takes away a whole lot of that emotional energy going on.
Yeah.
And then just recognizing, I see where you are, I hear you.
Yeah. And then again, you get a realization that maybe it was not even a tenth as personal as you thought it was, and that you internalized often when you've actually put your cards out on the table. The problem, though, Stephanie, is we have this money silence, I think, in South Africa. We don't talk about money. Generally, we don't talk it in our about money in families, at dinner tables. We maybe, certainly men like to talk about cars and, maybe what they're upgrading their car to or whatever around the braai, but we don't really have proper money conversations. Why do so many couples avoid money conversations entirely, even when they're educated and successful and otherwise great communicators?
Sure. I think money is like, it brings about so much emotion, and people, we always say like money is like this taboo thing, and people would probably rather walk into a room naked than they would come and speak about their money. Kim shares a story about a client who literally said she would rather be having a colonoscopy than in a meeting talking about money with her. So
we need to get her on the podcast, Kim.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know if she's changed her perception now. But I think it's just because money can create so much shame that people would rather avoid all of those emotions than talk about money. But I really think that to share kind of my story around money with my husband, is because I grew up with money not being spoken about, I made a point of always speaking about money, to the point where my husband was like, Steph, we're okay, like I'm in agreement, what do you mean? But now our money conversations become just really a case of running through a few things and working out what is the money for at the end of the day. Those are, if you can reframe those money conversations to have positive outcomes, then they're a lot easier, and not judging each other based on maybe what they want or what they want to spoil themselves with. I mean, I hear of friends who go shopping and then hide all the bags in the boot until their husband's out and then take it inside. Like, that's terrible. My husband's more like, well done, Steph.
But you've touched on so many key issues there, Stephanie, and money is an enabler, and we do tend to carry this shame with us around money, because there's this ego and this sense of worth that we are, I think, attached to how much or how little we have. And so we need to start breaking through those connections and relationships we have with money as well. So there's a lot more work that can be done beyond just the relationship. It's internal work that you need to do, as well as external work with your partner, Kim.
I agree, and that's what I always promote. But when I've seen some of my most powerful meetings, it's often when you take those emotions out and we're doing the black and white work. This is what we need and we're spending. This is what we've got. And these are the steps we need to take in order for this to work. Then all of a sudden something changes between the couple. So now that is completely mathematical, financial. We've taken the emotions out. We've showed them exactly where we are. No finger pointing, no judgment. And then all of a sudden what I've seen change across the table with the couple is they both go, oh, I can change and do this. Oh, I can do this. So as much as I'm encouraging the talking about this emotional, the triggers, and I do think it's the foundation, then the aha moment comes in where we go, let's strip all these emotions out. Let's just look at what these numbers actually mean. And let's look at how we can each play our part in getting these numbers to work. And I do see a complete difference then. And all of a sudden the teamwork can start happening.
It's having a plan.
Yeah, well, and it's one of the most basic tenets of financial planning is start with, the goals and then develop the plan to get there, because otherwise it's like trying to drive down to, the Namakwa line by navigating via the stars. We've got much better ways to do it now with Waze and GPS. But the plan is that. It's that every little step But it's a really powerful thought that, and Stephanie, maybe you can just build on, how we then start to structure a plan. And, there are many ways you can go about this. In a relationship, you can have joint accounts, you could have separate accounts. What have you seen that tends to work well, that helps create a sense of buy-in to the plan and the outcome, and then also delivers that kind of discipline that helps you execute on the plan?
Sure. I think, again, there's no right or wrong answer, and I think it's often hard. I would say we're not necessarily prescriptive as to what we suggest to the couple, how they run the finances, because everybody is so different. So what I find personally works really well is we each kind of run separate expenses, and then there's a joint card for all the joint things, because what I found became like a annoying issue in our lives was like, you go for dinner and it's like, is it my turn or is it your turn? I can't remember. And, so like those are just silly things that you can completely wipe out by having a joint card that is made for things like groceries, eating out, and all your joint expenses, and then you split the rest. But I think it is very personal to the couple in terms of how they want to structure that. I think creating the accountability is with having a financial planner and having built that plan up front, is having that accountability partner that's going to check in with you to say, okay, how's it working? How have the last 6 to 12 months gone, and how have you managed splitting your expenses? Is the plan on track? And then kind of recalibrating if you're not on track to get back on track. But the how in between, I think there's a lot of different options, but it's going to be personal.
Yeah, but you still want to create, from what I'm hearing, is that ritual, that rhythm, that discipline of checking in, and that helps at least break that silence that tends to then overtake us with the hustle and bustle of life when we have our money conversations. So Kim, anything to add to that?
I think maybe just to say no judgment.
Right.
Like there's some kind of like ground rules to doing it. You want a safe space when you're doing it, so to keep the judgment out of it. And then I think, with you doing that plan together, you've both put your input in. You've both had your say. And maybe my last point is schedule time to do it. Not just the once a year when you maybe see your financial planner, but schedule time like you do for everything else. This is something that is hugely important. And yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's hugely important if you want to have that more healthy relationship together and with your money. I mean, number one cause of divorce is around money, and I would say it's because people aren't having the money conversations. Yeah,
and that is, a powerful thought, actually, when you unpack that. The number one cause of divorce is not talking about money. And here we are talking about money being this enabler, this conversation that we have with ourselves about how do we achieve success or a successful life by whatever metric that is to us personally. And here it is undermining that very successful life that we want to build just because we're not talking about it effectively. And I think it's that effective communication that we really need to stress. Stephanie, just final question to both of you. What would you say to a couple who may be listening to this who feel stuck in an unhealthy financial pattern? Maybe one person controls, the other avoids. There is a bit of that silence, but neither is really happy. What's the first small step to start shifting that dynamic?
It's going to sound incredibly cliche, but go and see a financial planner. And I say that tongue in cheek, but I think that in that case, it probably sounds like the couple's stuck with their own biases and they can't bring themselves to see eye to eye. So obviously they can try and resolve it themselves. As we said earlier, put everything in black and white and kind of work your way from there would be a starting point. But outside of that, sometimes, to Kim's point earlier, is having that objective third party to just help you navigate your own conversations in a practical way can be really, really helpful.
Often just getting that, that appointment in the diary can be tricky. If you're not having the conversation and you say to your partner, come, I think we need to go see a financial planner, whoa, things can blow up and, you're accusing me of being XYZ. So, even
it's
that.
Like saying you need to go for marriage counseling.
Well, exactly. Now, and I know, Kim, you often talk about Bob Buford's idea of moving from success to significance. So is that shift harder in a couple when one person feels like their income defines their worth and the other feels just kind of unseen for their unpaid contributions? And also, as a last thought, how do we start breaking that cycle, giving some practical tools for people listening to this to say, right, that's the next step I'm going to take as soon as the podcast ends to start changing this narrative?
The first place to decide is that you want to change the narrative, that you want your life to be differently, that things aren't working the way they are going. Because if you can decide that, you can then decide that you need to get help. Again, many times I see people having different financial planners, and they go out there and one sees one and one sees the other. And all I've seen that do is compound these discussions that we're having today. So spend some time and actually go and find somebody that appeals to both of you. And yes, it's not going to be the first person that you meet. Go and see a few people, because all of this is first you deciding that you want to do it differently, and then it's secondly asking for help, because there is help out there.
Yeah.
But most of us, our pride is too much, so we don't. And then what do? Then we just have a half life. And I look at it and I go, what is the point in living with stress?
Yeah.
I mean, we hear these horrific stories of what's happening to people and the trauma that people are in, and we go, why do we want to be one of those statistics? So yeah, for me, it's just make that decision that you want to do it differently to the way you're doing it now.
Yeah, and maybe it's because I talk about companies daily for a living, but I kind of look at this relationship as a shared balance sheet, really. And how do you leverage that shared balance sheet to achieve your goals? Well, that net asset value is the combined everything that you bring to the partnership. So whether you're paying for dinner the one night or I'm paying, we're both drawing from the same extended balance sheet at the end of the day. And if you start thinking a little bit more holistically about what you want and what you want to achieve together, but it's very difficult. We can talk about it here, but there are all kinds of other things in that relationship that often cloud that conversation and make it challenging. But I think I couldn't agree more about trying to bring in an external third party in a financial planner to help create that safe space, because you need a space where you're not going to feel judged and where you're dealing with someone who understands that this is tricky terrain that you're traversing. But it shouldn't be. And I hope more people start talking a lot more openly and freely about their money stories in their relationship, so we can start avoiding those terrible statistics that we do encounter around divorce and so many other things that lead to relationship breakdown when it comes to money. Thank you very much, Kim Potgieter, Stephanie Ferreira. Been great having you in this episode of Life Chapters Money Choices, talking about money and relationships. I'm sure this isn't the last conversation we're going to have on this one. Thanks for your time. And that's a wrap on today's conversation, but we hope it's just the beginning of a few honest ones in your own life. If you took away one thing, let it be this: that money isn't a competition in your relationship, shouldn't be a source of silent resentment. It should be a source of collaboration. And the more we can unearth the stories, the expectations, and of course the beliefs that we carry about it, I think the closer we get, not just to financial freedom, but also to each other. And isn't that the point at the end of the day? Well, thank you so much to Stephanie Ferreira and Kim Potgieter for lending us their wisdom, their honesty, and their hearts to this conversation. Until next time, I'm Michael Avery, and this was Life Chapters, Money Choices.